Hello and welcome to Vishnu's IAS Academy Hyderabad. I welcome you to today's Hindu newspaper Hyderabad edition analysis, where I shall be talking about UPSC exam relevant articles from today's newspaper, that's 25th June 2025. And before I begin talking about today's key newspaper articles, here's a small request and reminder. Kindly do follow, like, subscribe to our channel. It is an online initiative through which we reach out to you with latest updates regarding all UPSC initiatives we are taking to enable your dream to become absolute reality. As thousands of our aspirants are becoming success stories, now is your turn. We are just a phone call away. Call, enroll for the latest programs, do comment and do participate in these online initiatives. Now, welcoming you back to the newspaper of the day. Yes, this is Hindu Hyderabad and the very first page talks about de-escalation. Last 1 week went into discussing the various aspects of the Iran-Israel war. The role played by US as not only a strong, staunch supporter of Israel when it came to bombarding all the nuclear facilities in Iran. And today the same US is claiming to have mediated the war. Yes, the first article says that both sides were told by the US President Donald Trump just yesterday that it is time to go in for a ceasefire to absolutely stop all cross-border missile exchanges. And now it is a reality that yes, for now the war has come to a halt. Of course, the situation in West Asia is very uneasy right now. In fact, it is fair to say that now we are experiencing a complete reversal of power dynamics in West Asia. Exactly how? That today's editorial article talks about. But this article just says that following the US accusation on both Iran and Israel of violating the ceasefire attempts, now is the time that both these West Asian countries have given to the US demand, and now finally we are seeing that despite here and there sporadic attacks on each other's territory, the real attacks and the fighting has now come to a halt. So this is one news, and in a similar light, more than about 2,200 Indians have been evacuated already from Iran. Yes, the rescue efforts along with huge support from Iranian Indian embassies is still in place, where more and more people are trying to coordinate with these agencies, and the government is trying to rescue those who are still trapped in the interiors of the war-hit zones. With that, let's proceed with other important articles for the day. And as we proceed, we will just quickly go to the editorial page where we have the most important articles. And yes, here's the first article on the editorial page. As I said, it is in the same background of the West Asian crisis which we were just talking about. The article says a complete reset has happened in West Asia. Now this de-escalation, which world feels is a great thing that has been achieved. Ultimately, the constant war, the genocide, the humanitarian crisis and the economic shock that was being experienced as both the countries were engaged in a massive escalation has now come to an end. To entire world community, it is a very good development because as of now, yes, there is a promise of peace. But looking at West Asia more closely, it is not just a de-escalation, it is a reset of power dynamics. Iran, which was feared among other West Asian countries, is no more a fear. The real fear now is Israel, because Israel today has become that unleashed, uncontrolled power, completely backed by US, which has not only tremendous weaponry, a great war-grade military that's ready. Apart from that, also perhaps some nuclear arsenal which has not been disclosed to the world at all. So today, the power dynamics have completely bowed down in the favor of Israel in the name of its de-escalation. The article begins by saying that in the last week we experienced a lot of bombarding into Iranian nuclear infrastructure sites which were deeply buried inside the ground. We have spoken about the Fordow and we have spoken about the Natanz nuclear infrastructures of Iran. These were very technically made, these were hidden very appropriately, and yet owing to a superior bomb busting technology of the US, which has become very debatable today, as another article of the day talks about that technology, US was able to not only reach these facilities but also bombard them. While we do not know the real damage, but at least it was enough to wage a full-scale war against Iran. Among all these developments, the article says the rest of the world powers became a silent spectator. They did not do much to stop the war, neither did they do much to support Iran against an ally of Israel backed by the US. For example, as per the article, Russia and China, both these countries had signed a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement with Iran. While Russia had signed this in January 2025, China had signed this in March 2021. But despite these partnership agreements, both the countries were not very proactive in supporting Iran. And same thing applies to India. India was also in a very big foreign policy dilemma. Israel, a long-term supporter of Operation Sindoor, the only country which had openly supported us in our attempt to fight back the terror infrastructure in Pakistan. So India couldn't say openly anything against Israel. Also understand Indian and US dynamics. So India could not say much. Similarly, talking about Iran, not only there is a great people-to-people connection between Iran and India, so many Indian students studying medical, studying technology-driven courses in Iran. Apart from that, the bilateral trade. Of course, the cultural ties that have been long-standing between the two countries, India could not either say much against Iran. So India also became a mute spectator. It was very calculative with its foreign policy. But the fact that the whole world is now quietly just watching, not being able to do much, this has given a lot of advantage today to a country called Israel. How? That's what the article says. Article says today's reality is very different. For example, let's say Israel. Israel today has become one such country which has more than 40,000 American troops that are present in its territory for protection and military backup. There is no other military challenge that can confront Israel in West Asia right now. There's a very famous quotation which says, two powerful swords cannot stay in the same place. Similarly, right now, as Iranian might has been dislodged, Israel has happened to become the most superior military power stationed in West Asia. What is worse is that we do not know the nuclear capacity of Israel. So the article talks about a very hypocritical attitude of the global community, particularly Western diplomacy. It says Western diplomacy is very diplomatic. It's very, very sometimes shallow, because Iran was one country which has been a part of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, which means Iran agreed to only keep its nuclear power for peaceful use and for no kind of nuclear weapon development. Similarly, Iran was also ready to be very transparent about all its nuclear programs to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. It was already negotiating with the US and being very open about its uranium enrichment process. And despite that, it was bombarded. On the other hand, we have Israel. Neither has it signed the NPT, nor has it been transparent at all about what nuclear capacity it has today. Nobody has a clue about its real military strength, given that also the support that comes in from the US, which means Israel is a much more dangerous force to reckon with. And still, the Western diplomacy, US in short, happened to support Israel, not Iran. So this shows the diplomacy of the Western world as per this article. The article is also worrying about how it is becoming a negative example in front of the world. It has set a very dangerous precedent where a country that was ready to abide by NPT, a country that was coming in open with regards to its uranium enrichment process and technology, was punished, despite it claiming that we are not having any dangerous military intent behind our nuclear capacity. And still it was rebuked, it was attacked. On the other hand, we have Israel, which has been defying all these norms, and yet it was supported openly. Is this a right example to lay before the global community, is what the article is asking. Now the article is also asking that not only was Iran attacked, but also in the process, there are various Iranian proxies, Iranian support systems existing, say in Lebanon, Syria and Gaza. The various countries plus the non-state actors, the terrorists, rather the extremist groups, as per the US language, as per the American parlance, these were also attacked. With this, apart from today, just the Houthis in Yemen and in Iraq, the militia, there is no other power that is ready to support Iran openly, which means as other countries in the West Asia, they were already afraid of Iran. They were already afraid of the Khamenei's power. They completely supported US. In that regard, they were also ready to acknowledge Israel as a separate sovereign state. They were ready to sign up the Abraham Accords. Abraham Accords, a set of agreements where the countries are readily accepting and believing in a separate sovereign existence of Israel. So this also went on happening under US pressure. Today, what is the reality? Today, the reality is that Israel is in a position nobody can endanger. Tomorrow, what it is planning to do, or tomorrow, the kind of expansion that Israel has in mind, nobody shall be able to keep that in control, because all the other opponents have already been toned down in this recent episode of war. Plus, the article is also saying that as Iran decided to hit back, for example, Iran, when it took revenge against US trying to bombard its nuclear facilities, it also attacked all US military bases. We have seen in the news how the biggest one in Qatar was also attacked, where more than 10,000 American soldiers were stationed. Keeping that in mind, no matter how much Iran was ready to retaliate, there was no other country that came openly in support of Iran, which also left Iran slightly speechless. It just left it supportless at that point. Therefore, today the situation is such that in Iran, there is actually no threat with which Iran can endanger other countries in West Asia. Because we all know that the power balance has completely shifted now. There is no alternative now to Israel. And the danger is that tomorrow, what if US do something similar in Iran, what they had done previously in countries like Syria and Libya? Consistent presence of American soldiers, something similar in Afghanistan also before the Taliban took over. Humanitarian crisis, continuous civil wars and destabilization. So today, if both these regimes have become destabilized like Syria, Lebanon, what if the same thing happens in Iran? Because constantly it's under attack. Then who shall be able to prevent that situation from happening? Nobody. So today Iran is living in that very dangerous political vacuum. That's what the article says. Article is also saying that it is another reminder for all other countries of the Gulf region, as they were busy supporting US and accepting Abraham Accords and acknowledging Israel. Today, is their own position safe? Probably not, because what has happened to Iran can happen with them as well. Talking about Israel, the article says the whole world knows that the leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, is an ambitious man. He has the idea of creating his dream, which is known as Eretz Israel. It is a term which means a massive area of Israel, a huge piece of land controlled by Israel, beginning from Jordan up to the shore of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, who will stop this dream from becoming true? Well, nobody. There is US support and there is no other counter country to hamper or stop this mission from taking place. We also understand that in General Assembly, as the General Assembly in the United Nations acknowledges a separate existence of Gaza Strait, but Israel soon wants to create a world map where there is no presence of Gaza Strait at all. There is no identity for Palestinian state. It wants to annex all of that, but then there is nobody to stop them. Similarly, the article also says tomorrow, if this annexation happens, if Israel is able to make its dream come true, which probably it might, given the current global geopolitics. What if it does? What will be the situation of all those Palestinians who will be trapped in that Israel-captured Palestine? Will they get equal rights of citizenship, or shall they always remain as second-class minorities? Again, that points out to a humanitarian crisis in making. So, in that regards, that's what the article says, that today we are living in a very dangerous geopolitical order where there is absolutely no clarity as such that what will be the future of West Asia. As far as the other Gulf states are concerned, they are also in a dilemma. The dilemma is that as Iran will experience a collapse. It will lead to regional instability. Who will fill this vacuum? What if the same situation in Syria, Lebanon, and sub-Saharan Africa repeats in Iran? What if there is extremist forces like ISIS and Al-Qaeda that come and take over Iran? Then who is going to be responsible for that? Also, just like the Iraq chaos, just like the Libya chaos, tomorrow if there is more and more of regional terrorism happening in Iran, it only means war in West Asia will continue to happen. Similarly, the article also therefore says that initially the Gulf countries used to be very scared of Iran under Khamenei and its nuclear power. Even though it's a paradox that Iran had made very clear its nuclear agenda and it was also a part of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. But today, as Iran is losing power, what guarantee that Israel will not do the same? Israel will not become more extreme in its expansion agenda. The other countries today need to understand that taking support of the US and letting Israel create a massive regional footprint in West Asia could tomorrow endanger their own position, entire stability of the West Asian region, and perhaps a new Iran that stands at the border, stands at the forefront of becoming a future ex-Iraq, Libya or Syria. Who will be responsible? So India also is in a dilemma. Just like today, other countries are being very, very politically neutral when it comes to this situation. So is the role being played by India. India has consistently been trying to call for ceasefire, de-escalation. India is happy that de-escalation has happened. But even though India recognizes that what has happened is not the solution, but still, there is nothing much India can do, given its great ties with both Iran on the one hand and then US-backed Israel on the other. That's the pitch of the article, that today, for the world, let them enjoy de-escalation. Now, the real crisis is yet to begin. We are yet to see what happens in West Asia. With that, there is another very important article just below this. It talks about gender inequality in Indian bureaucracy. Very, very important GS paper too. Quite important GS paper for ethics answer writing. Let's see what the article says. Article begins on a very positive note. It says that right after the 1992 73rd and the 74th Amendment Acts to the Indian Constitution. This should also remind you of the 11th and 12th schedules of the Indian Constitution. The article says after these amendments, 73rd and 74th, regarding urban local bodies and the Panchayati Raj institutions, a very great part of this amendment was allowing women 33% or 1/3 reservation in both urban local bodies like municipal corporations, municipalities, similarly at the level of Panchayati Raj and village as well. So which means we were empowering women at the grassroots level by giving them a certain amount of seats as reserved for them. But this, despite being a great development, has not really resulted in many women also being equally representative in Indian bureaucracy. There are still the administrative domains in India where we see an unusual domination by men staff and not by women staff. This has impacts. It has consequences. Why? Because when women are in power, it has multiple benefits. One, it acts as a role model effect. It inspires many more women to come and take up to public services. Second, it enables gender sensitive policy making. That also is not happening until women take up the leadership roles. Having said that, the article also talks about how today women are, although 46% of the locally elected representatives in Panchayati Raj, but talking about Indian bureaucracy, as of 2022, the data says women were only 20% of Indian administrative services. Apart from that, very low women being represented in urban planning, municipal engineering and transportation authorities. The article also says, talking about police services, only about 11.7% of national forces constitute women. And the gap is very concerning. Why is the gap concerning? Because when it comes to city, when it comes to urban place or an urban area, women are more vulnerable to urban problems. A very good example highlighted by the article is that women in the cities are more associated with public travels or public transportation. talking about public buses, public metros, or say for example the cabs or the local trains, it is women who use public transportation much more because men usually drive their own vehicles. So the data says if women are so dependent on urban infrastructure like transportation, like medical care, like public parks and facilities, then if there are no women in policy making for urban areas, naturally it will not result in gender sensitive policies and initiatives because women in power will understand the needs of women on ground much better. The article also says that today, as we say, the representation of Indian women, there is a study on sustainable transportation and development. It says that 84% women in Delhi and Mumbai use public or shared transport while men use just 63%. The number of men is only 63%. But despite that, the urban planning is yet to be working on women's safety. That's a big gap. Similarly, the article also says that as per 2019 safety pin audit, it's a research work which says that across 50 cities in India, over 60% of public spaces were not even lighted properly. They were very dimly lit. There was no proper lighting in that place. These were dark spaces, which means if women are using cities so much, they are also very unsafe. This attracts more crime against them. Now the article is also saying that this underrepresentation of women in bureaucracy and urban planning has some very dangerous effects. For example, there are studies by United Nations Women, UN Women, United Nations Women. They show that most of the urban planning is prioritizing water. It's prioritizing health and safety for public. But at the same time, there is a huge gap in implementing gender sensitivity in these plannings. So gender sensitive design is missing from global urban planning, but specifically from Indian urban planning, because women are not there to make these plans. They are still not represented in bureaucracy and leadership roles. So there is a concept introduced by the article which should be implemented in India. This is known as gender responsive budgeting, or GRB. In this, no matter which plan you make, whether it's in domain of public health, or whether it's about urban infrastructure, or whether it's about agriculture, some separate funding should be allocated only to create women welfare policies or to improve women participation in leadership roles. That is missing in India because globally this program, the gender responsive budgeting, GRB, had been introduced in 1990s, but in India it is still missing because as per 2005-2006 data, in India, very few places like Delhi, Tamil Nadu and Kerala were able to adopt the gender budgeting. Rest of the places it was missing. Delhi was able to do gender budgeting only in two regions. One is transportation and the other is public lighting. For example, there was public women-only buses that were introduced, or areas near women colleges were provided with much better street lighting, but these were not sufficient to cover all the women in urban area. Similarly, the article says that today, countries such as Philippines, they have rules where minimum 5% local budgets are always given to gender sensitive programs. Similarly, there are countries like Rwanda. In Rwanda also, the gender sensitive or the gender oriented, gender responsive budgeting is mandatory. In Uganda also, gender equity certificates are extremely important, and this is also visible in countries like Mexico, South Africa. But in India, it is still much lagging behind. So today, as we talk about creating inclusive urbanization, a city, please remember UN right to the city which will allow its infrastructure to be used by all residents in the city. Today, as we talk about a gender sensitive public planning, let's understand that women need to be in those places in bureaucracy, in parliament, where they can sit in the leadership roles and legislate laws that are gender sensitive, because a woman will always enable much better gender sensitization on ground. That's the pitch of the article. Article is also saying that just like countries of Brazil, Rwanda, South Africa, South Korea, they have seen positive benefit of gender responsive budgeting. Today is India's turn. Say for example, Brazil has tried to prioritize sanitation and primary health exclusively for women. Talking about Rwanda has experienced an improvement in maternal mortality rate when it improved gender impact assessment in public policy. So today in India, we need that kind of a gender balanced bureaucracy where there are more women in bureaucracy to make entire budgeting equitable and balanced. So India is now trying to become a $5 trillion economy, and yet therefore today we cannot just say that by creating smart cities our duty is done. What we really need is to improve more representation of women. A very good example is the Kutumbashree, which began on a very humble note, like a self-help group, and then of course a massive organization attracting a lot of microfinance, has created great examples of including women in transparent governance. So we should learn from all these cues and make Indian bureaucracy quite representative in terms of gender. Now, as we talk about gender, what a coincidence, just a small column of news left to this on the same page talks about a very interesting development. You should remember this name, talking about women empowerment. Now here we are talking about the International Olympic Committee, and there's a very welcome development that the first woman, in fact the first African woman also, to now be taking the charge, the leadership of International Olympic Committee, happens to be a lady known as Kirsty Coventry. So she is a woman from Zimbabwe who has become the first African woman, in fact the first woman to take up this leadership role. So please remember the name. The rest of the article talks about responsibilities of the International Olympic Committee that we'll forego because it's sports oriented, but do remember this name because it talks volumes about women empowerment. With that, let's quickly proceed further, and there's a great article just on page 7 which talks about how, if we say today that the world population is more than ever, we have 8 billion people across the globe. Article says out of that there are 2 billion people who still do not have access to safe, sustainable drinking water, which means only 6 billion people have an access to water that is not only free from contamination, that is accessible 24/7 all the time, and that's coming through a trusted source. But there are 2 billion people across various poor regions in the world, vulnerable communities in the world, who lack this sustained continuous access. And if they have access, then the water is highly contaminated, not only resulting in mortality, early premature death, but also resulting in serious infectious diseases like cholera and other kinds of viral bacterial infections. That's the main idea behind the article. Just let's see 2-3 important points for the exam. Article is saying that today, as we are living in a world that's overpopulated, there is a problem that around 156 million people are getting water in a way that can be called safe. Either they can take it from streams or lakes, or they have a consistent supply through taps, bore wells and other arrangements. What about those people who neither have an access to piped water, nor can they access wetlands like lakes and streams, because either they are not available or they are unsafe to consume? So 3/4 of the 2 billion people who have no water are also those people who are drinking contaminated water. Article says safe drinking water was a huge priority in our sustainable development goals, and back, if we talk about 2017, then that time the main idea of giving safe drinking water was to make sure that an individual household is getting its basic minimum need of safe drinking water at least once a day. But today, as we talk about 2025, we know that water to be delivered safe to each and every household is something that our municipalities have not been able to accomplish at all. There are multiple reasons behind it. There are infrastructural, financial problems. At the same time, there are problems of people themselves living in such geographically isolated areas that reaching to the nearest lake or wetland becomes a massive problem for them, with women and children being worst impacted in the process. Article is also telling you that countries, if they try to invest more in situations like clean piped drinking water or a trusted borewell source, are those who can provide some universal drinking access to their people. But this also means only a certain partial part of their population is covered under this policy, while the remaining are left behind. Unsafe drinking water, as per the article, is leading to about more than 8 lakh deaths every year. It leads to diarrhea. It leads to viruses like rotaviruses. It leads to dysentery, certain diseases like hepatitis that can be mortal in the long run. They also happen. Apart from that, of course, malnourishment is again a very key yet neglected aspect of lack of safe drinking water. The article is saying that today majority of child mortalities, that's the death among children around and until the age of 5, this is also primarily attributed to poor drinking water, safe drinking water. So therefore we are saying that if providing people with a continuous safe drinking water is such a key challenge, then it is something the world community needs to focus more, because that's a huge problem. Say for example, if 73% people have an access to safe drinking water, then 18% people have just one basic source to survive upon, in which people wait all day with their buckets and utensils just to collect decent amount of needed water per day. Similarly, 3.7% people even do not have that source, and then poor contaminated sources are being used by people living in some such places that are either highly contaminated or severely polluted. Industrial pollutions, metallization of water, or agriculture runoff. So that's the demand of the article, that today as we talk about the surging global economy and the world wars, this is a very important thing, that even today more than say 2 billion people are suffering and dying from lack of safe drinking water. Quite an important problem there. And as we proceed with the remaining news from the newspaper, there's one interesting, very small article, but we should notice on page number 8. It says the Indian government has agreed to procure more defense equipment to further strengthen Indian military strength, and the amount is more than rupees 2,000 crore. And this will be primarily spent to make our army future ready for counter-terrorism operations. Operation Sindoor has been a great lesson from where we have learnt to be always ready to counter terrorist or counter terror attacks, and these acquisitions will be shortly completed in a span of few years, and variety of equipments are being purchased or being procured to the Indian Army. Some of them of course are the drone detection and advanced interdiction systems. These include piloted aerial vehicles, remotely piloted vehicles, of course vertical takeoff landing systems, bulletproof jackets, ballistic helmets, and all these various arsenals. And recently we had also discussed the CIPRI report, that the global expenditure on arms and ammunition and defense is only going up. So in that light you can link this article, that today the defense expenditure, is it the need of the hour, or is the global community just running in a rat race for more and more weapon and better military preparedness? With that, as we proceed further, there is another important article that I shall want you to see. This is page number 10. Quite important. It talks about sustainable development goals. So the set of 17 sustainable development goals are there, and the target year is 2030. But the great news is that India for the first time has improved its position, improving from about 109 to today 99. So India has ranked 99th when it comes to implementing successfully its sustainable development goals. That's a wonderful news, and India has finally come in the top global 100 countries when it comes to implementing these SDGs. So the latest report says that India has a score of 67 on the Sustainable Development Goal Index. Quite an improvement. Also, the index is therefore highlighting an overall progress towards achieving all 17 goals. Apart from that, there are certain countries like Bhutan, which has ranked 74th, Nepal 85th, Bangladesh 114th, and Pakistan 140th. So quite a great improvement for India there. And the report also is highlighting that despite all these gains and achievements, which is a great news of course, we have to also understand that given the nature of global conflicts and the climate change in general, there are certain goals that are yet to be implemented successfully. Supposedly the one on universal sanitation, the one on clean access to the clean drinking water, basic minimum education, and promoting a more inclusive economic development. So these are certain things we have to work more upon, and yet quite a positive development. So with that, we'll quickly proceed further, and I'll show you another important news as it is there on the last page after the sports segment. So there is another article that has come in page number on the text and context column, which talks about America's huge and massive attacks on Iran's nuclear side. So we have discussed this article in detail. We know the names of all 3 nuclear infrastructures attacked by Israel. I requested you to remember all those names because prelims you get such questions in places, and why have they been in news. The only thing I would want you to remember from this article is that the name of the technology as such, which US has used in order to bombard Iran's hidden or deep underground nuclear infrastructure, is known as a technique referred to as the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. That's important. I think that's the only takeaway from this article for us. Rest of the article is repetitive, that why did the attacks happen despite Iran's transparency about its uranium enrichment, how did Iran retaliate, and how this was the first of its own kind in the world, anti-nuclear disarmament attack, which was a very time-taking one, started from the US, ended all the way, did its accomplishment in Iran, came and landed back in the US. So the technology itself is referred to as the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber technology, and it has used GBU-57 bunker buster so that they can penetrate very deeply into sites like the Fordo enrichment facility that was deeply inside a mountain situated in Iran. So that's all I would want you to remember for this article. And then the last article from the science page is also quite technical, but I'll just give you the main theme of the article. Well, the article is just saying that as we live in a world which is experiencing antimicrobial resistance, AMR, it's a common term today, overuse of antibiotics in agriculture, farming and human usage has resulted in creating superbugs that are endangering the future of human civilization by probably creating a pandemic or a disease that shall not be controlled by any antibiotic, because these germs are now very, very resistant. Similar thing is happening with regards to various fungal infections, because people not only in agriculture and dairy industry, in animal farming, but also within human Western medicine, they are using too many antifungal drugs known as azoles. You may have heard about these examples. They are available over the counter in India, known as the fluticasone or the voriconazole. All these are antifungal drugs used to treat skin infections to other severe internal infections. But then overuse of these drugs to kill specific type of fungals has created so many mutations in one strain of fungus known as C. tropicalis. Now it is mutating so quickly that newer strains of fungus has come, which is very difficult to be killed by these medicines. So tomorrow it will present a massive danger to human health itself, because if you remember during COVID-19 pandemic, as doctors were using steroids and various medicines to control the impact of COVID, people started complaining a side effect in the form of fungal infections like the yellow fungal infection or the black fungal infection. These are all examples of how these funguses and germs learn to mutate if too much drug is used, because then they are beyond control. No kind of antifungal medicine can take care of them. So this article is exactly throwing a light on that in a very technical way, that just like too much antibiotic is dangerous, similar is too much use of antifungal drugs, whether in agriculture, whether in animal husbandry, or whether in human medicine. It's very, very dangerous, because this tomorrow can lead to some such germs which will not be killed by no amount of medicine. No wonder that the World Health Organization is talking about the disease X, a danger unknown pandemic that may come in future and cause a danger to humanity. On that note, I'll end today's discussion. See you tomorrow with more interesting news articles. Like, share and subscribe to the channel. Please comment should you want to discuss something with us. Thank you so much.